Go ahead and pull this up. All right. Let me share this at channel streamers. All 100 of you. Okay, so we'll let the streamers get on. And we'll go ahead and get started here. Oh, I did get something interesting happened to me today, which is cool. So about 5 months ago, 6 months ago, I think around May, I was on a podcast for TypeScript called TalkScript, and it went really well. It was really nice. And this guy emailed me today and said, like, hey, I heard your podcast. I really liked it. It was good. If you want to write blog posts for our company, you can. We'll pay you like $350 per blog post. And they get like 400,000 views a month or something. And I was like, sure. So,
What's your first blog?
something on TypeScript. So I'm pretty stoked about that. It'll be fun.
What's TypeScript?
Good first question. Yeah, it's just something you can add to JavaScript to add typing to it. So if you wanted to add types, like, hey, this has to be a string and this has to be a number or something, you can. We might talk about it briefly when we go over the end of the React stuff. But so the streamers should be up. Streamers, we good? Yeah, I got some thumbs up. That's good. Okay, so today we are going to take the Mongo a little bit further. So there's a lot to this class. It's supposed to be a Saturday class. It's an extremely busy class, but because it's not a Saturday, I'm skipping some stuff. For instance, I'm skipping the warm-up. We don't need that. It's not important. We're just going to do the critical activities, which pretty much the entire class, so that's exciting. Literally, like the warm-up and the next second warm-up are marked as not critical, and then everything after that's critical or high. So I'm skipping the beginning of class. Anyway, what we're going to learn about today is Mongoose. So we learned about Sequelize and how it works with MySQL. It was an ORM. It helped us call code, you know, with MySQL in more JavaScript-like fashion, right? So we had these objects we could pass in, and it would automatically turn them into the table rows and stuff like that, and do inserts and updates for us. It was pretty nice. Now, we might not feel that in Mongo it's as necessary, because Mongo is pretty easy compared to MySQL, right? You can kind of just inject JavaScript objects as is. However, there's other things with Mongo that aren't so easy and kind of suck. So, for instance, you create a property on your objects, right? In Mongo, you can't really, they're not strict. So you can't say this has to be a string or this has to be a number. You can kind of do whatever you want. So as the inverse problem of MySQL, whereas it's not strict enough, and you can kind of do whatever and cause a lot of problems. So Mongoose helps us make it more strict. It's kind of the opposite effect of Sequelize, which kind of makes it easier for us to use. This keeps it easy for us to use. It's not any harder than Mongo.js itself, but it adds stuff on top of Mongo to give us like an actual schema and stuff that we can rely on to always be true with our data. So you can have custom validations and stuff like that. It's a nice... Garrett is not streaming. Awesome. Thanks, Garrett. So it's a nice kind of layer to put on top of MongoDB. So, for instance, here are the docs, mongoose.js.com. It's a pretty popular library. It's probably downloaded several 100,000, if not million times per week, because Mongo is used a lot in the Node community. So we're actually going to jump to activity 14, where we'll kind of show these schemas a little bit. We'll go over the docs eventually too. But you'll notice if we look at this package JSON, we don't actually need a dependency on Mongo.js anymore. Mongoose does the connection. It does all that stuff for us. We don't need Mongo.js in here. We're not using it directly. We just need Express and Mongoose, and then they have Morgan in here for some reason, which I think is just a logger, so I have no idea why it's there, but it is. So Mongoose can kind of do that stuff for us, which is really nice. The connection stuff, the updates and inserts and removes and all that stuff it can do. So if we look at our server.js, there's a couple things that are a little bit different. For one, we're now requiring in Mongoose here.
Did you say exercise 15?
14.
14.
15 is your actual activity that we're going to be doing next. So right here we have Mongoose that we're requiring in, right, instead of Mongo. Here we're going to be requiring in our model. So this is kind of like when we did Sequelize, require in models, or the DB or something. We'll get into that in a moment. And then right here we actually do a connection to the MongoDB, which is slightly different than the way we're doing it with MongoJS. So MongoJS, we could just tell it the database to connect to. So for instance, we could just do, hey, schema example, and then tell it the collections we wanted out. In this one, we don't worry about the collections, but we have to give it the full URL to the MongoDB. So in MongoJS, we can actually pass this one in as well. It's just MongoDB : / localhost / your database name. So in the case of Monday, it would have been MongoDB : / localhost / zoo. Right? Okay, I don't know why that's way up there. Like so. That would have been Monday's class. This is just the full URL. And the other thing is, there's a port associated with this. It's default 27017. It's the default MongoJS, or the Mongo port, which you don't have to put if you didn't change that port on installation. And none of us should have done that, because it's been a massive headache. So hopefully no one did, and no one's complained to me about it. So I don't think we have to worry about it. But anyway, that's your connection string. So MySQL has that, builds it under the hood. When we did you know, server and database and password and all that stuff, it would build a string kind of like this for MySQL, but it was always hidden behind layers of packages. We're using it raw here with Mongoose, which is interesting that they do it that way. Anyway, you go ahead and load it up. It's connected. You don't need the connection. Mongoose is just connected after that, for better or for worse. And then actually, we're done with the Mongoose object itself at that point. We can just use the model they were bringing in. So why don't we take a look at this model before we look at how it's used. So the model, it is similar to Sequelize in some ways. Like, it might look familiar in some regards. It's a little easier to use, I think, and a little bit more sensical, but you guys can be the judge of that. So we're going to build a model. We need Mongoose again. Mongoose has this schema object that you can pull off of it, and the schema object's a constructor that we use to generate a new schema in the Mongoose system, right? So the schema is what's used before we save data and when we update data and stuff like that. So again, the schema, it's a constructor, so you can just go ahead and pull it off, or you don't even need to do that. You don't even need to pull it off. You could just do this if you wanted to. It's a little bit easier to do that, though. And it's going to return our new schema that represents our table. In this case, we're just going to have some random properties, a string, a number, an email, a Boolean array, just to see all the different types we can use. So just like Sequelize, the property name right here is the name in the Mongo database. So if we were to go look at this database and do a find, we would actually see a property string equals something. Property number equals something, right? And in the schema, the value of that property are the attributes of that property in the database. So for instance, we want this to be a string. We want to be able to trim leading and trailing white space from it. We want to make it required. So if you try to create an object in MongoDB without this string property on it, Mongoose will say, nope, cannot do it. Now in MongoJS, you do whatever the hell you want. Whether that's there or not, kind of up to you. But in Mongoose, we can tell it to say, hey, do not let people put bad data in our database, right? We don't want that. So this is kind of how you can start to define it. Then it's nicer because the types are the actual types built into the system. You don't need like the Sequelize.string or whatever. You just have string, and it figures it out, which Sequelize could easily do, but they're lazy. So right here we have a number, right? This type is a number. Well, Sequelize can kind of do it. This one's unique, for instance, so you can't have one in two different documents in your collection. In this number, you'd have to have 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever, and it's required again. Now, remember that these are only enforced at the Mongoose level. If you set all of these properties in Mongoose, and then you go ahead and you go into Mongo, it's a possibility you can override some of these. And you can tell Mongo, I don't really care, I'm going to do whatever I want, and Mongoose will just validate from this project. Now, that's not always true, because Mongoose can inject indexes and stuff to help us, but for the most part, it's being enforced from the app, but not from the database. So, again, you got to be careful about that. There's an email type. You can even tell the email type. I'll scroll down a bit. What you want to match on. So for this, in this case, we have a regex that we're using, and we're saying, hey, this is what a valid email looks like. And if it's invalid, we can give an error that says, please enter a valid email address. And it's type of string. We have this Boolean property, and this one's simple. We just tell it it's a Boolean. We don't care anything about it. It's not required. It's not unique or anything. It's just, if there's a value here, it should be a Boolean. This one for an array. Now here's what's interesting about Mongos. You've probably seen, we can just put arrays right on in there. We don't need to worry about, you know, putting them in another table or anything like that. You can just drop the array in, and for the most part, it just works, which is interesting. Now this is an array in the sense that we can put anything in here. There's no requirement on the type of object in the array because you can specify that. It's just an array, woo, you know. So a little dangerous, but you can do it. There's a date type, and it is of type date, and it defaults to now. So you can set defaults. And then there's a long string, which can have validation that requires the length is got to be greater than or equal to 6. So here's a custom validation function we can add to it even. That's called when we try to persist our data. So when we try to call create or save or something, this will be called. If it fails, we'll get an error message that says long string should be longer. Any questions on the schema? So this is how you can set one up. Remember that schema object is constructor, right? You're creating a schema object from the schema constructor. And we got it right here. When you're all done, you have to do one more thing. There's this mongoose.model function. And right here is the name of the model, which represents the name of the collection. So sort of like the sequelize.define, although it does not change the collection name. It might pluralize it, but we'll find out. I can't quite remember. Right here is the schema. So you have to pass in the schema associated with that model. And what you get back is an object that can kind of do the things you need it to do with Mongo. Any questions on that?
So on Monday, for example, you put zoo, for example.
We didn't do anything like this on Monday.
I'm saying like when you export for the last, when you export it.
Oh, when you export it, would I put zoo?
No, like where it says mongoose example, you put the name right there.
Here? If we were to use Monday's, this one would have been animals. Or animal. And it would, I think it pluralizes it, so we'll find out though. Yeah, so this would have been the animal component. So you can export the model and then use the model. Now the nice thing about it is once you establish the connection here, the model just has that connection. So you're good, you're connected.
So you have to create a new one every time you create a new collection?
Nope, you just, oh, every time a new collection, yes.
Okay.
You have to have a model per collection.
So that's your table structure essentially,
yes.
how you want to enter your fields?
Yes, absolutely. And then from here, when you want to use it, you just take the model and you call the functions. So create will create a new one. You pass in this data that we're defining right here, right? So it's got the array, which is just random stuff. It's got a Boolean, it's got a string, it's got a number. These two are required. This one's unique, right? So if these aren't here, it'll fail. And so this good data should just get injected in with this create function, which is a promise. When it's done, it's going to go ahead and return the object that it created. So we're going to run this really quick. Clear npm. Do an npm install, make sure it's all good. And let's go ahead and do node server JS. So it creates it, it logs it. Don't worry about this warning right now. You can see it has the same properties The only difference is it has this underscore ID. Remember that object ID that Mongo creates? It has that. It also has this double underscore V, which equals 0. Don't worry about that now. That's something that Mongoose creates. That's not usually not necessary unless you want to use it. So we'll ignore it in this class. It's just like a version modifier, and you can change it to say, hey, this thing has changed if you wanted to do like concurrency checks and stuff. Not that important right now for us. But it creates the ID, so now we have that ID that we can associate with the Mongo object if we need to use that unique ID. Now, how do we validate that this has actually all happened? Why don't I open up a new terminal with Mongo. I'll blow this up a little bit. Whoa. Actually make the window bigger? It did. That's irritating. Okay. I'll bring it up a little bit so people in the back can see over the heads. Alright. So if we show our DBs, we now have a schema example DB. So we can use schema example. And then we can show our collections. We have an example, so it does pluralize it, and it makes it lowercase. So 2 lower and adds the S at the end. So if we do db.examples.find .pretty, this is what we got. That same thing you can see right down there in the console that Mongoose injected. So very similar to Mongo.js, but with some extra safety. So why don't we see how some of this other stuff works. So if I run this again, what's going to happen is it's going to try to inject this data again, but remember this is unique. So what should happen is it should fail. And sure enough, if you can see that, it says error E11000 duplicate key error collection schema example.examples index number 1 dupe key, and then it tells you that there's a duplicate 42. So Mongoose does a few things. Technically in Mongo this will be the case. It will throw an error for me because Mongoose has created an index, a unique index. So when you have a unique property in MySQL, for instance, it creates this thing called an index that enforces that uniqueness. It says these things can't be the same value. Same thing happened here. I can't inject another object with the same value there. I just can't. However, if I change this to 41 and I run it, we're off to the races, right? And then I can go back to my terminal and I can do another find. And now you see I have 2 in here. One is 42 and one is 41. So that's not something we can get from Mongo out of the box unless we add those indexes specifically and we do a little bit more work. Can we do it from Mongo? Sure. But it's not something you always think about as much because it's not really enforced, right? So that's another issue with Mongo. So what's another one? Well, for instance, this string is required. So what happens if I'm obviously going to have to change the number, so we deduce that. What if I just go ahead and get rid of the string altogether? I don't even have it on the object. What's going to happen now? Boom. It explodes. It says example validation failed string, property name string, and that is string is required. So this one didn't call the database or anything. It just ended up right here giving us a message. Hey, strings required. Now this is definitely only from Mongoose. There are some indexes you can do, I think, but they're again, they're not there by default in Mongoose or in Mongo. So this is a Mongoose thing right here. So what else do we have? We had a long string, right? Let's go back and look at the example model. Long string, it needs to be at least 6 characters long. Let's put 5 in there. What? I know, isn't that insanity? Yeah. So if we run it this time, we have different numbers and everything. We should get an error saying it needs to be at least 6 characters. And there you go. It's hard to see, but Validation failed. Long string should be longer. Making sense? Any questions on this? Cool. We are going to move on to an exercise then. Exercise number 15. I'm going to go ahead and run it really quick, show you what it looks like. I'll close this code. Oh, I can leave that open. Yeah, I started Mongod when I got into class. So let me just run this activity real quick so we can all see it. You're just going to be, I think you're just going to have to change server routes on this one. Alright, so port 3000. And don't shy away from the Mongoose docs if you need them. I'll slack them out in a moment. Oops, that's 8080. Okay, so let me make this smaller. Username, Carson, password, 123123, email, carson@isawesome.com. Submit query. And here we go. Comes back. So we're going to be creating a schema for this user that has a username, a password, and an email, storing it in the MongoDB. And you should be able to see it all right here from the web page. Okay, so that's what we're going to work on, activity 15 for the next 20 minutes or so. And I will slack out the docs for you.
Could you explain how the regex is checked?
Like what the regex itself is doing.
Yeah. Like, there's a period after, like, the act, and it's just broken off. Unless everything starts with the period after. So I can do this website, so it breaks down what it does. So the first period matches any character except line breaks.
Yep.
Match one or more.
One or more any character, an @ sign, one or more any character, a literal period right here, one or more any character.
So that's the literal period, the backslash.
Backslash period. So this is very simple. This is not actually a good email regex, which there's almost impossible to come up with one, but basically it's like any set of characters, at least one, so it could be A or anything.
So that's what just the period is.
Yes.
Like the first one starts the regex.
Yes.
Right? And then it says
Yep.
anything.
This is a start.
Yeah.
Any character other than spaces and line breaks. An @ symbol, literally an @ symbol. Any character other than spaces or line breaks, at least one of them. Literally a period. And any character except spaces and line breaks, at least one of them.
So the plus is what's denoting.
One or more. If it follows a set, it means one or more of that set. So you could even say like, I mean, one or more here wouldn't make sense, but you could have the literal period, and then you could do like com, net, org, etc. This would say one or more. You would want to specify like one, but you could even change it to work with TLDs and stuff if you wanted to, but that's risky because they're making new ones all the time. So, yeah, this is very simple regex, but it works well enough.
Yeah, I googled email regex and I got one that like specifies like you have to have 2 or 3 after the dot, like the last dot, so it can't be less than 3, maybe more than 3.
Yeah, so that might not be a good enough rule because there might be custom stuff out there that works fine. And I don't know. Regexes took me a really long time to pay attention to because I didn't want to learn them because they're hideously ugly.
They are, but I find them very intriguing.
That's
I
good,
actually want to know.
because not a lot of people do. They're helpful in some cases, but they can also be if you're too good at it and you write too complex of regexes, it's not a good thing. Not always.
I just want to be able to
Look,
read
that's
it.
your specialty.
Then people will hate you. It's like, why the hell did you write that regex? I have no idea what it does. So, again, another one of those buyer beware. If you like regex, great. But with great power comes great responsibility.
was thinking like in other languages you can use like these exclamation points. I wonder how they
How they do regexes?
yeah.
Usually it's as a string, and they pass it into this special regex object that compiles the regex.
Yeah, it's pretty useful.
Yeah.
I'm thinking in like Arabic.
Oh, in Arabic? I have no fucking idea.
Because it's like one letter connects to another letter, just like cursor.
Yeah.
I'm never mind.
I have no idea how Arabic regexes work. I don't even know if they do work. There probably is some out there that.
I'm thinking they don't even have it. You guys, no one takes my idea. It's my thing. You guys figure out your own language.
It's all you know.
You guys figure out your own language.
I'll warn you, implementing a regex is extremely difficult. So, have fun with that. Especially on something like Arabic, that's probably even more difficult. Because there's probably all kinds of rules about what letters can go where, right?
Yeah, and it's the other way, right to left.
Yeah. So.
Oh shit. Right.
One time, my grandma came. She's like, "It's going right to left. It should be going left. Like it's doing the opposite. It should be right to left." And my grandma, I don't like spying. And when they read the magazine, start from the other way.
Mm.
Saying, "I open this the first." It's the first page.
Weird. I think Japanese and Chinese are that way too. Right to left.
Yeah,
Probably Korean, they definitely.
Up and down.
Yeah.
So we had our Japanese dog in.
Yeah. Well, I did it without like a piece of data, like without a password or something. Without all of those people.
Oh my word.
Yeah. Your required and the validation.
Yeah, greater than 6 letters. No, trim means
This is the unsolved version, so I'm not solving anything for you yet.
trim means
Just putting it up here on the screen.
Why did you put tree? After a while, I think this is more like preferred. I don't know why. Yeah. Parts of the original.
I think the more you do it, the more you know what's funny is like the more you're doing models,
We didn't even cover it.
I know that one call about 15 minutes was off for the later. Nothing much to do with the one later instead. I know what the code is like for it. So shit and it's fun. It's like babies and these kind of things.
What kind of article did you read?
Something front end related. I have to look at his details again.
Oh, they sent you something at one.
They said they have a list of topics I can choose from. It's probably gonna be front end related because that's what they do. Oh gosh, I gotta look at the company name again.
Do you have like an opinion page where you can write your opinions? Like
They probably have comments. I don't know. I think I'm posting it. I think I'm
Sans
gonna be posting it on Medium first, and then they're gonna like redirect from their site to that, like this Medium group or something that they use. I forget exactly what he said.
Yeah.
I don't know when it'll be done, but yeah, I will.
Unless writing is done in like a rush, just put in a deadline. That's the concern.
I don't think there will be a deadline, and they just said get one done for us, and you know when it goes live, then we'll pay you for it. And I was like, that's just a bonus. Cool.
Like you just sit here and write about something that like.
Yeah. So, pretty stoked. It'll be good. I've been meaning to start up a blog on Medium or something. I don't know. Because there's some things I'd like to blog about just because I think they're really interesting. And they've taken me a long time to figure out. So, they're not going to be very helpful to anyone. But they're interesting.
You never know.
Yeah, you never know. If I had seen these articles when I was trying to figure out how to do COM side-by-side loading, it would have been amazing. But I didn't.
Look at it.
Exactly. You probably never will.
People
If
read
you
it,
need help
listen to
doing
it,
it.
that they don't know about all the time,
Yeah.
so that then they know it. In
Yeah.
case they ever need it. Are there any good, like, well, you said it was a TypeScript podcast that you run?
Yeah.
Are there any, like, other podcasts that you listen to related to what we're studying?
Related to what we're studying? No, not really related just to this. I know Dan Abramov released his blog lately, and it's really good. And he's the guy who wrote one of the guys who wrote he's the guy who wrote Redux, and he's a contributor on React. His blog, like, he's only got 3 articles, and they're really good. He's extremely smart, obviously. He's very important in the community. I listen to Software Engineering Radio from time to time. It's a good one, but it's very in-depth. And it's random topics. Some of them are good, some of them are boring. There's a few others that I would listen to. I don't listen as much as I used to. So,
Is there like a fan letter for them?
for who?
For like engineering podcasts?
Probably.
What's the TypeScript podcast called?
TalkScript. TalkScript. Episode 10 was the one I did. And I quit Access off like a week after that. It's pretty funny.
Is that food place you're working at?
No, that's Aspen. That's where I'm at now. Axoft is where I was. I did this thing where we talked about Get Kraken and what it does and stuff, and then I quit. Okay. Let's go ahead and go over this. Fist of 5, how are we feeling about this activity?
So it's not bad.
Not bad. That's good. I like to hear that. It seems like everyone's feeling pretty good. Cool. How do you think? How does Mongo stack up to MySQL so far, in everyone's opinion? Easier.
Should have taught us this first.
Should have taught you this first. I actually disagree. I like that order they took. They teach you the one that's more strict, has more rules, that you can, beat your head on the desk for a while about it, and then you get to this one, and you're like, wow, this is great. It's so easy. Because this is the one you're going to want to use probably in your final project anyway.
Yeah, I was telling him like a research project for the project. A lot of was using Mongo. I didn't know
Mm-hmm.
So now I realize, oh, that was manga.
Yeah, now you can use it. Anyway, let's go over the activity. So I have the unsolved one here. And just to cheat, I'm going to pull the solved one up on my machine. Okay. So we're going to add in those four properties. And I'm going to just delete these lines because I don't want them there. I just want to see the property names. Okay. So, first things first, we want a username. So, we need to type what? Username. And then, what is the value going to be? Some object type, string, exactly. It's string type. Trim. Trim, true. Okay, it will also be trimmed. It'll also be required. Oh, required is, yeah, it's probably better just to do an error message, though. It's a little better for the user. Cool, there's one. Password. The object. What is the type? String. This one is also going to be trimmed, right? Okay. Nice. And then what else? We can just do a simple one like that. And what else about this? It should be required, right? Cool, there's two. Any questions on these two? Now we're going to have our email type. This one's going to be slightly different. So this one is going to be what type? Again, a string. It needs something else that the others don't have. It is going to have a match. Before I write that out, what else does it need? Unique. So the match, we could go ahead and talk about that, but I'm just going to copy it from the solution. That works. That's totally valid. Copy it from the other one. I don't expect you guys to learn regex.
Oh, they do it to us in the comments.
Oh, did they? Oh, okay. So and last we need a user created. What is the type of this one going to be? Date. And we need a default. Date.now. That's it. If you run this, it works.
All those types are mongoose related, right? Like,
Nope, those are the actual built-in JavaScript types. I go down here. Same type. We have this.
Is that why they have to be password?
Well, it's a constructor. So in this case, type of date would equal date. It'd probably be object, actually. But if you did instance of, I think it would be date. So you could do like date instance of date would be true. So these are legitimate JavaScript types. Any questions on this one?
So trim means no spacebar, essentially.
Not necessarily. Trim means if there's blank space before the first non-blank character or blank space after the last non-blank character, it'll remove it all. So if we had something like, say we have the string, and it's, oh, I'm typing the wrong one. My bad. Say we have a string, I'll just put it up here. Some string, and it's like space, 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 test, space, 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 space.
It just cuts the text.
Yeah, this would equal test after being trimmed. Cool? Cool. The TAs will slack out the solution for you. Close that up. Boom. Very nice. All right. So I like this. I'm liking this so far. Mongoose, it's not so bad. It seems like you guys are liking it a little bit better, right? You now have access to a little easier of a database than MySQL. It's less intimidating, I feel. So, what else can we do with these schemas that we can create with Mongoose? Well, a lot. But one of the cool things you can do, create custom functions on the schema. So let me open up the next example, and I'll show you what that means too. Don't save. So our user model, this is all going to be the same, nothing crazy here. But right here, after we define it, okay, so let's look at the properties really quick. We have our username, type string, trim, required, password, just like we did, email, just like we did, user created, just like we did, same schema. But we're going to add a new property called isCool. It's going to default to false. No one's really cool. No one's born cool. You have to earn the cool, right? So what if we want to add special functions to the schema to make someone cool? Say, before they're inserted into the database, we want to guarantee that they're cool. We could do that. We can actually create a function called the coolifier, and it's going to change your name to whatever your name is, the coolest, right? That's actually what it'll do, because it takes this, and in this case, this is the Mongoose object that's going to be persisted to Mongo, right? Take this username, and we're going to change it to this username plus the coolest, and then return it. And it goes ahead and returns that new username. Or we can make you cool and take this is cool and set it to true. Just by adding these functions on the schema, so you take the schema that we created up here, remember? So we use the new schema constructor. There's a methods object you can add your new methods on. Kind of like the prototype stuff that we did with constructors, but for the Mongoose schema. You just set it equal to a function with the actual function keyword, no arrow functions here. This needs to be the function keyword, so if you're thinking of being fancy, don't. Then you have access to them, but how do we use them? Because they're on the schema, and the way we used it before was we just did, you know, we create this model, and then we just did like model create. But calling user.coolifier won't do anything because there's not a user, right? There's just these functions that we're going to call. Well, luckily, if we go to the server here, when we use our user, when we go to create a new user, we can actually use that model also as a constructor. So if we use that as a constructor, we can pass in our rec body, and that'll have a username, password, is cool, date created, stuff like that, right? It'll have all those, email. So similar to the last example. But now we actually have these functions we can call too. So coolifier, when we run this, is going to change your username to whatever it is, the coolest, and make cool will make you cool. And when we inject that user into the database with this user.create, they'll now have those different properties. So make cool show up and all that fun stuff. So let's see it in action. I'm going to npm install no. It got it. Good for them. Node server JS. It's gonna run it. Cool. So it's running on port 3000. And what I'm gonna do is open up Postman. Oh no. Shut up. I don't care. We're gonna make a request. I'll go ahead and make one here. We'll do a post to http localhost 3000 submit, right? So I mean, I guess I could do it through the UI, but who wants to do that? And our body, we'll go ahead and make it JSON user. Let's do username, C Howard, password.
spell time.
My sister's making lasagna and she invited me and I couldn't go. That's why.
What?
That's why.
Email.
Because of this class.
So we have my email, and then we can do is cool. Defaults to false. We'll just keep it as false for now. Poor Carson, he's not so cool. So we send it. Wow, look at that. Is cool is true. Let's see if I can blow this up. Boom, boom, boom. Good old Chromium apps. Is cool now comes back as true. My username is now C Howard the coolest. And even better, if I go over here, let's go to Mongo. Mongo. Show DBs. We can use custom methods. Show the collections. db.users.find.pretty. Boom. You'll see that in here too, because I called those custom methods, my username that I clearly typed in as C Howard has now been altered, despite my wishes, to C Howard the coolest. And is cool is set to true, even though I clearly sent in that it should be false. So someone thinks I'm cooler than I am. That's okay, I'll take it. And that's how those custom functions work, right? So the important thing is this, in the context of these custom functions, is the object you're about to do something with, right? It's the model, effectively. And you can mutate it here. So say you had a full name property, and they had to give you a first name and a last name. You could create the full name here. And just add it on. Do it for them. Or if they give you a full name and you want a first name and a last name from it, you could split it here and create the first and last name. Any questions on these?
So that you can also do it to a number.
Yeah, you could multiply a number by 10, say, or something, or do a tax calculation. So say you had like a product and you had to pay for it, and you wanted a subtotal, which was the total of all the products you're buying. Then you had a tax. You could do the calculation here and then create a grand total property on it for the user. They don't gotta calculate it, right? So stuff like that, just helpful little things you can do. That's really all they should be. They shouldn't be that crazy. They should just be helpful little things. So any questions on the custom methods? Cool. Let's jump to activity 17, where you're going to be adding some custom methods to the user model. And go ahead and use the UI to post and make sure they work and all that stuff.
Which example is this?
This is 16.
The user model method.
I don't know.
Is anyone else having trouble finding this example? You figured out?
Still in 15.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Sorry.
No problem.
Did you run the server? And if you post with the UI, there's like these messages I've never seen before when you post, putting it on the server side. Is it Mongoose?
Probably.
It says like post/submit 200 and then.
Oh, that's Morgan.
Oh, that's Morgan.
Yeah, they have that package in the package JSON. They have Morgan. That's Morgan.
Oh, okay.
So in your server, there's a logger that their app.useLogger dev from Morgan. You can see there. That's Morgan. I didn't come up with his names. It's the name of the package. I don't know. Some guy named Morgan made the package. So I'll call Morgan. There was probably a reason. If you go look at the package, I'm sure they tell you why.
It's like Mongoose.
Oh, I should get up and walk around.
It's like Mongo.
All right, let's go over this exercise. Too much chattiness. Obviously, you're done or something. Okay, fist to 5 on this activity. Is this one a little harder? Yeah, this one was more difficult. Okay, so we had to do a few things. First things first, we've got to add these functions on the schema, right? So we need to figure out exactly how those are going to work, and then we're going to have to go ahead and call them. So the first thing, let's look at the schema really quick. We have a first name and a last name, username, password, mostly the same, but we got the first name and the last name. We also have a last updated and a full name. Now these aren't required or anything. There's no special validation logic because we're going to create those for the user. You can see that the first name and the last name are required. So we know we'll have them. So right here we want a function called setFullName. It's going to take the user's first name and last name and pretty much add them together. So we need the schema. So remember, this is going to be like prototypes with constructors. If you remember those, we need to call the .methods object, and we're going to add our custom methods to this. So this one's going to be setFullName. We're just going to make it a function. So we can take this full name, and it can be this equal to this first name. We can add a space in here, plus this last name. So we're just taking the first name and the last name, adding them together with the space in between. And we have the full name. I don't know that you technically need to return them. I think you can if you want to use it outside the function. But as long as you set the full name like that, I think you're good. So we'd have to verify that though. It's just a convention that they're using here. So at that rate, last updated date, set the current user's last updated property to date now. So again, we can take the user schema, we can call the methods, we can call last updated date, make a new function. You don't have to return? I didn't think so. So we have the last updated property. We want to set it equal to date.now. And if you want to, you can return this last updated. But again, you don't have to. So here are custom instance methods that we can now use on our object. But to use it, we have to do a couple of things. So if we go into our server right here, was everyone good on this? We go to our server, you can see right here, this is where we would need to use those custom instance methods on the setFullName, the last updated date, or whatever. We need to use these methods with the model. Well, we can't use them right here because we don't have any data to work with, right? So we can't just do like user setFullName on nothing. So what do we have to do? First thing, we have to create a new user with the user model as a constructor. And we could take the rect body and just pass it in. Now we have a user model that we can actually interact with, and we can call these functions on. So remember, we have a set full name function and a user last updated date function. And the last thing we need to do is pass the user in here. Instead of rect.body. If we had passed in rect.body, they just get the normal request data. But in this case, we're actually changing the request data here in this user model. So why don't we validate that this is all working? We'll do an npm install. It should open it up. It should say installs properly. If we do node on the server.js, it should say, hey, running on port 3000. I can go ahead and open that up. Localhost. So first name Carson. Word. What? Oh, this is username. I'll make Carson. Carson. Howard. Password 123123. We'll submit the query, and you can see we have a full name that's Carson Howard, and the last updated date, which is in this case the same as the created date. But if we go back to it, we can hopefully change the same one. Nope, it just exploded. Okay, well, we can't update it yet. But if we could update it, that updated date, yeah, because it's trying to create it again. The updated date would change. Anyway. Any questions on that? Does anyone have any other questions on anything we've gone over so far today with the schemas, custom functions, any of the stuff Mongoose does, Mongo, any of that? Yeah. What do you need to see? Functions? The TAs will also Slack out the solution for you so you can look at it.
So on date now, you have to have the parentheses.
Yes, because you have to execute it. It's a function. If you don't, you'll get a function in there, and that is not a date. And that'll cause problems. Did it explode? Cool.
Where does where does the database get created?
Where does the database? That's a good question. When Mongoose connects, I'm pretty sure. So in the server, when it connects, it's going to create that database if it doesn't already exist.
Oh.
And then when you create the model, it'll actually, it's either when you create the schema here, it'll create the model, or when you do your first create. I can't remember, but those are the areas pretty much. I think, oh, it's right here.
It's right there, yeah.
When you do this, this is where it's going to actually create the table too.
And then it creates the database.
Or the collection.
Off the name in that.
In that string, that connection string.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
After the localhost, that slash, you have the name of the database. That's the database name.
Okay. Well, won't it actually not create until you submit the first form and enter the data? Because if the database doesn't have any data, it won't create anything in Mongo. Then that was supposed to be first Saturday.
Then it probably doesn't until you actually save something.
Yeah.
Like it prepares it all, but it won't actually create anything until you submit the first record. But because Mongo is very unstructured, so the database doesn't need to exist in isolation.
Right.
It just needs to be a container for other stuff. So yeah. Any other questions? Cool. Why don't we come back at 8:05? Take a quick break.
Oh, so Morgan is from Dexter.
Oh, that's the character?
That's funny, because actually, I've seen that show too. I'm just idiot.
Centered on the
They-
NPM, it's like the first line.
They just picked a random name then? They liked it or something?
I guess, yeah.
They were watching.
Must have been.
Still not joining.
Put it out in Slack. It's like the first.
Yeah.
It's like the first line on the YAML site. It's like this is from the name came from this. Just like oh, those are unique. Yeah. Mm-hmm. This isn't your first cohort, right? You've done this before.
This is my second, and I've substituted for a bunch of classes to look up the cohort that was in between me. Yep. I did probably like 2 or 3 weeks of instruction in the first cohort that I did, because my instructor went on vacation, another instructor went on vacation, and I filled in for them. And because I knew about one class in that I should have probably been an instructor.
Were you like a TA?
Yeah, as a TA. When they first reached out to me, they said, "Do you want to be a TA?" And I was like, "Sure, I don't know how you become an instructor and all that stuff." I just thought that you couldn't be without like a certification or something.
Sure.
We went to the class, and I liked the instructor I worked with a lot, but there was just things he didn't quite know, and he did sometimes tell the students the wrong thing. And you know, you can't just be like, "Hey, by the way, you're saying some stupid shit" in front of all the students.
Right, yeah.
You know, it makes them look bad, and they knew it. At the end of the class, a lot of them were like, "Yeah, we could tell that he was bullshitting us, so we didn't know." Kind of like, but for the most part, he did a really good job. And he was a good guy. He worked really hard for them. There were just times where he was out of his element, and I don't know. And near the end, too, it gets really hard because, you know, we're doing this for a long time. And by now, everyone's starting to get tired of it. You know? Everyone's like, we've been doing this for a while, we've been learning a lot, we just kind of want to be done. We kind of want to just know it all and be done, right? I know everyone still wants to learn it, but... And we feel the same way, you know, as the instructional staff. We're tired, too. You know, we've been doing this for a long time, there's a lot you have to pick up on, and a lot of work you got to do to prepare, and I'm lucky because this stack I know really well. I don't really have to prepare. I can just kind of come in and wing it.
You do it every day.
I don't anymore. I did for a while.
Yeah.
But if you don't know the stack really well and you haven't used it in production, there's a lot of things you just don't know about it. It makes it harder to teach, and you have to do a lot more prep work to make sure you understand the concepts. So I'm lucky that I know, and I've dealt with all of these things at work, and I know some of their pitfalls and the problems we've run into. Like Mongo, when I first learned about it, was amazing. So this tool is fantastic. It's so easy to use, you can store your data, but now that I've used it in production, I don't know that I'd ever use it in production again. Unless I had really simple data stored.
Yeah, I just messaged my guys from Group 2 and I was like, hey, we should like turn our project. We can actually, with Mongo, it's a lot easier to like store users.
Oh yeah.
For the way that we want.
No, for the most part, storing users is really easy in Mongo.
Yeah, I just like pinged them on Slack. I was like, we should turn project 3 into the thing we wanted project 2 to be.
Yeah, there's I think a couple groups are thinking about doing that. And you get to pick your groups, so by all means.
Yeah.
feeling? Good. You starting to feel better now?
Well, yes and no. It's like it's a roller coaster at first. Because I'll feel good and then I'll overwork. All the drafting looking down. You know, I'll take enough breaks and then I'll pay for it.
Yeah.
And then like
You
last.
get to come tight.
Well, this isn't too bad. It's the looking down at blueprints constantly all day. That's what kills me. But like last weekend, I don't know what my deal was. I couldn't look down very well. Wound up slipping off a curb and I thought I broke my ankle. Yeah, it was crazy.
Brutal.
It's just clumsy, dumb shit like that, you know. Here's what it is, I guess. So how hard is PHP to learn?
Probably not that bad. It's a real wacky language. It's dynamic, like JavaScript. It's got some weird conventions to it, but PHP was invented. I don't totally know, but it feels like to make server-side web development much easier because you like integrate it in with your web pages a lot and stuff. So you have like PHP stuff around your HTML.
Yeah.
And so it was like the first real powerful take at doing that server-side development in a way that wasn't very difficult.
Okay.
So there's a lot of things built in that are really nice for web development specifically. As a language overall, I would never use it. I think it is a pretty easy one as far as they go, and obviously still very widely used.
Right.
It's not a bad
Well,
one to learn.
everything I'm looking at in the valley as far as jobs is requiring, you know, knowledge of PHP. No question.
Really?
Oh yeah.
There's going to be a lot of JavaScript out there too. There's going to be a lot of PHP for sure.
Where are you looking?
Indeed and LinkedIn job search.
Yeah, I've been doing LinkedIn jobs that I haven't done Indeed yet.
A lot. But I'm also looking more front end type stuff too.
Front end, you're probably running more PHP.
I
Yeah.
usually just
You're going to run into usually the stuff like React, Angular, and all
Yeah.
that, and then PHP.
Yeah, that's what I've been finding.
PHP is really heavy for WordPress too.
Yes.
So,
And there's a lot of WordPress.
there's a lot of WordPress.
I've been seeing that.
Because basically what people do is they start like a marketing or advertising agency and they sell websites to small businesses.
Yep.
And
WordPress.
this is something that I went through. I actually had a bunch of interviews, probably like 5 of them, with these type of companies, and they're all like, basically they said, well, your background is more like JavaScript-y, kind of the enterprise development stack. Are you really interested in doing WordPress? And I said, I'm not really interested in selling websites and then servicing the accounts. And that's kind of what they said, well, that's a huge part of the job, you know, that's where your bonus comes from. And so
There are companies out there, like I had a buddy who came to one called, I totally forgot. Anyway, they're full stacks of PHP, and they don't do that. Like most of the companies that do PHP aren't kind of like that. They do WordPress-y shit. So, but there are still plenty out there that just actually go.
I will tell you, if you're smart about it. So I have a buddy who's a senior HR guy, who's like in charge of an entire division. Like he's got like 5,000 employees, right? So he got a resume of some dude, and he sent me this resume, and he's like, this is what your resume should look like as a developer. Oh, I looked through everything, and it was all about the features this guy had implemented. Well, I went to the website that the guy had featured to the website where he had implemented all those features for the company they worked for. It was a WordPress website. So basically, through working as a WordPress developer, he fooled the HR guys into believing that he was a really good developer. And I don't know if they sent him through the developing part, like through the interview process, but he said that guy ended up getting hired. So
it at least tricked.
Yeah, it is tricked them, and you can still say, like, even though you're working on WordPress, you're still developing the web. You're still doing production level builds, although they're not really scalable.
Yeah, WordPress is one of those things that it's more like niche. Like, hey, yeah, I do WordPress development, and then you're in that space.
And you're kind of pigeonholed a little bit.
You can be, if you don't take care of yourself and keeping up to date with stuff, you can be totally. And you can make a lot of money doing it. Revolution Parts. Yeah, Revolution Parts is what they work for. They have a e-commerce platform for auto parts sales and stuff. And they're getting pretty big, and they're all PHP. And I interviewed them, like, have you done PHP? I was like, no. Can you learn it? And like, yeah, I can learn it. They didn't really want to go. So I didn't.
Nice.
What do you search for when you search?
Front-end development. Yeah. I don't feel confident enough to do like anything full stack wise because I don't have, you know,
Even as a junior?
years behind it. What's that?
Even as just coming as a
I
junior?
don't know. I don't know that I would really enjoy doing really a full stack.
If you enjoy front end, there's
I do.
plenty of it for front end.
But I also have a design background, so
That makes sense.
that kind of helps. And I would at least get in. I would like to get into something that I'm more comfortable with to start, and then use that as a platform to kind of
If
go.
I think they're usually on Wednesdays, it sucks, but when the other class goes to React.js, meet us.
Okay.
That's all front end. And the Phoenix JS too is pretty much all front end. Those are two really good ones. Another guy who runs Phoenix JS too. He's a good dude. Yeah, those are good ones to go to. It is, because there'll be a lot of companies that are like, yeah, we need 5 juniors to do this shit or something. And it's mostly React. So.
That's like my mic finally. Like we're just good. If you want more fun, I need to oh, you're on my group. Yeah.
Yeah, I was like, what are you talking about? I was legitimately part of that.
That's why, like, I start shitting on my name. People are like, oh, you remember when you did this or this? I'm like, no.
But 4 years ago, it was like last week.
Yeah, like, I start shitting on my name.
Otherwise, I want to choose a Mountain Dew something. Fucking grade school or something. I like that this class is giving me a better appreciation for what I don't want to do.
It'll do that real quick.
Yeah.
Not even that is.
That's all we do. We just go apply tic-tac-toe.
That's like giving me bad, whatever it's called. Yeah, you put those patterns. Is that what you were doing coming outside of?
Yeah, pretty well. More than maybe. You always play that game. It was the house.
On your way here, like, I spied the way it was about. I spied gray.
Conservative Midwesterners love having things to do.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Also very, if you think they're conservative, wait to see it.
I still have to, like right now, my kids, I can get that cold brew, totally with it. I try it.
No, not drugs.
That's why I like it. It's not bitter.
I've seen some.
I guess I'm used
So
to
those
bitter.
people,
Acidic. Yeah, it's way less
they're like
acidic and
step
not
away
bitter at
from
all. It's more, but I like it because it tastes more like caramel.
Oh,
Like you get more of that
the craziest
caramel
one,
flavor.
No sugar, just straight.
You wanna try some? Take one of those.
Oh, no, I know. I just want some and like, is this for me?
Alright,
I
yeah,
need to
okay,
go
so brewing it at home is different. Like I have a little thing that
Oh, you do that at home?
I do some at home sometimes, but like that really depends on the beans that you get. Because
And
like
when they get to go
when I brew it at home, it's a lot less thick. Like these people, I don't know how they get it to brew so thick, though. It's like when you drink it, it doesn't taste watery. But when I make it at home, it's less thick, more watery. I don't know. It's weird. I don't know how to explain it. But like,
No, I know what you're talking about.
like look at how thick.
They probably produce a filtration process.
Yeah.
No, I've been doing that coffee for probably 10 months now.
All right, is everyone back? Everyone ready? I'm gonna put on my jacket. It's a little chilly.
Oh yeah. I tried trying to drink sugar beverages for like 5 years now. I used to drink like 30 cans of Coke a day. That's when I stopped and
That's a
lost
lot.
like 20 pounds. I was like,
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah, I'm trying to cut sugar out right now too. I'm on my 4th day with no added sugar. I probably had like 10 grams of sugar total today, and that was because I had a banana. So,
Oh yeah. For stuff like that, it's fine. It's just like
natural.
my downfall was sugary beverages.
Yeah.
And like I went cold turkey and just started drinking green tea or black tea without anything in it.
Yeah.
And now I'm on coffee.
yeah, I do coffee, but I normally do coffee with either sugar or like a mocha syrup or something. Now I'm just doing coffee and cream, which I like. It's not as good as sugary coffee,
Of course,
but
yeah.
I lost 40 pounds after
yeah, dude, it's crazy. It's so bad for you. I
I
love it though. I love soda.
I was weighing like 225 and I stopped. And
I'm not judging you because I love soda. If I could drink it for every drink, I would. But the problem is, a couple years ago, I was diagnosed as pre-diabetic, and like I wasn't even that bad, and so I'm just like disposed to get it. So if I don't take really good care of myself, I'm just screwed. I'm just gonna have diabetes. So there you go. All right, let's get back into it then. So we're gonna talk about some other stuff that Mongoose can do that Mongo definitely can't do. That makes it a little bit more powerful. So the custom methods are nice. They can allow you to, you know, kind of manipulate data right before you are gonna persist it or something like that. But one of the things that Mongo definitely cannot do is relationships between documents. So one of the big drawbacks is your documents are in total isolation. In MySQL, we can do things like have a primary key, foreign key relationship where, say, we have a restaurant and the restaurant's servers or something, and the servers are tied to the restaurant with the key of the restaurant, right? And there's this tight relationship in MySQL between the two, and they pretty much can't exist without one another in some regard. But Mongo doesn't have that. You just kind of have documents, and documents float around and do their thing. But say you have a document for a library to represent your libraries, information about the libraries and all that. And then you have information about all the books. And in Mongo, you want to store what library the book belongs to. Well, it's really difficult because it's easy enough for you to just put whatever you want there, and there's no way for Mongo to validate it. However, for Mongoose, there's special functionality to allow you to build these relationships in. So if I'm going to go ahead and run this if I can get to the code. Hey, look at that. If I can get to the code, let's do npm install. I don't know that there's going to be anything in this database yet, so I might have to add some. Alright, so it created a library for us called the campus library. So we're going to go ahead and open up localhost 3000. Alright. Author Carson, the best book in the world. Okay, so we have the campus library and the books related to the campus library. Let's see. Did it build a relationship? Here you go. So now we can see the campus library with all the books associated with it, right? So if we were to just query in Mongo, we'd see your books. We would see your library. And if we wanted to somehow see the library with all the books associated with that library, we'd have to do a lot of work. And actually, we can validate that by simply going into Mongo. We can show DBs. We can use populate. Let's show the collections. We're going to have books and libraries. So if I do db.libraries.find, if we look at this, there's actually an array of books. And in that array of books, there's an object ID associated with a book. But there's not actually a strong relationship here. I can't do like db.libraries.find and include books or something. If you want to actually do that kind of relationship, you need to be pretty strict about it, and you need to like do special kinds of aggregate queries to find it. And I could delete the book, for instance, in the books collection, and it wouldn't affect the library collection at all. This object ID wouldn't exist anymore because I've deleted it from books here, but it would keep it here. It wouldn't like delete it. Nothing special would happen. Mongo doesn't care, doesn't know. It's like whatever you put in this array is on you, man. Like that's all good, which is a blessing and a curse, right? But Mongoose allows us to build this relationship right here where you can see we have our library, campus library, and all the books associated with it. So what does that code look like? If we go into our book model, we won't see anything fantastic. We just have an author and a title, a very simple schema, nothing special at all. That's it. Pretty trivial. But if we go into our library model, in our library schema, we have an array of books, which we actually define as an array. You can see it's got the brackets here instead of the braces. Oop. So it's actually an array, and in the array, we can tell it what kind of object it'll be. We can say that the type's going to be schema types object ID. So this is like sequelize, where you have to do sequelize.string and sequelize.int and stuff. We have a special type for the object ID, since that's very special to Mongo. And then we can use this ref property to tell it what model we're going to be referencing. And so this ref has to match this model name right here. This is book. This is book. Note that in the DB itself, it's books, lowercase. It has to match the model because this is a Mongoose specific function. So when you create your library, you can tell it to populate and load all of the books. It has to know what model it's loading the stuff from because it's actually going to go run another query. So if we look at the server.js, let me get rid of all this, and we find the populated, you can see we do our library.find, which is similar here to the /library call, but we have this extra populate, and we don't necessarily need to tell it what to populate, but in this case we can. We have this books property, so we're saying, hey, the books property is related to some model. I'm going to call populate, and I'm going to populate my books. It's going to call out to that book model, and it's going to say, give me all the books that are associated with these object IDs that are on the library. It's going to load them up for you, so when you do your res.json or your console log or whatever, you can actually see all of the objects in one. So the only difference, there's two differences here. The library now has a property that literally references the book model, and we actually have to tell the library to populate the books. So it's an extra function on your find. It's a little extra definition in your schema. And it builds this relationship for you, which is really nice. And you can persist information this way. So you could build a library here and fill out all the book information. So in this case, we're just creating a book, doing a find one and update on the library. So this is a new function too. And there's this push function, $push, where you can tell it we're going to create a new book. Here's the book ID. So again, this right here is kind of a complex looking statement, but this object that's being pushed matches the schema of this object in the library array. So the reason why we have to use $push, well, the $ tells us that it's not a property name. There's not a property name push. It's an action in Mongo. And we're pushing to the books array, and we're pushing a new book ID. And this is going to be a new item. We're not updating one. This is going to be a new book. This is not going to be a new library. A new book. Right here is the query to find the library. So this just adds it to every library. If I adds it to the first one, finds one library, the first one, which is the campus library, and updates it with a new book ID. So there actually is quite a lot of syntax here. Specifically, I think is the most dense part of it, figuring out how to properly push and add information to these arrays. The populate's probably the easiest part, because you can just do your find and add the populate function at the end. You don't even need to pass in books. You can just do that. It'll just populate everything. So if you had multiple references, all of them would be populated at once. That's the caveat here. If you only needed the books, you'd only populate the book. So this push code is a little bit more complex because you need to use a new find one and update function. And then right here, this reference, this property that you're defining is a little bit more complex because you need the reference. Any questions? Anyone confused about anything? Need a little bit more explanation? I understand that there's a lot here. So we're going to go through an exercise on populating. What do you mean? I mean, I was just running it from the browser. You want to see me like running a debug or something?
Oh, no, I'm just the browser.
Oh, you want me to show you again? So right here is that query that does the populate. When it calls populate, it fills in these books. So if I go back here and I go see your library, this is the find query right here. And you see books is just got a 0 and this weird object ID. So it's not very helpful. But in that find and populate, that book ID is replaced with the actual book object. And then obviously the book is the same. So I can add another one. Carson 2, the best book in the world 2. Great book name. Here now, our library has both books in there with their different object IDs. And if I go to populated books, you can see now I have both books.
This is how library works.
Is this how library works?
Like online.
Maybe, if they use Mongo. Any other questions about this? Anyone want to see anything else? Cool. The only other thing that I want to show you here is that you might see in this next example is this. So when we're requiring in the models, before we were requiring in a model at a time, the user model or something along those lines. Now we're requiring both of them at the same time by literally pointing our requires to this model's folder. And remember, when we require a folder, it automatically looks for the index.js file, finds it, and here we're literally just exporting the required the models. So it's just a wrapper object around the other models. That's like kind of what the SQLized DB does too, but that one has a little bit more complex functionality. This one's just us doing it by hand. Alright, we're going to do exercise number 19, where you're going to go ahead and add some populate functionality to the users. We're going to add some notes that we can populate in the users. Nice. So we're going to spend a few moments doing that before we move on to our last activity.
code you put into a thing. So Google, you see website on your like, so your website goes on searching on Google more than
There's like a part to it.
but generally you put code in like somewhere in like JavaScript or like component to it. So like how do they work?
How does what? The Google search work?
You know, the search engine optimization, what do they do? Just
There's rules about what you put in certain HTML tags and it reads those. That's the gist of it. There's more to it than that, but
so it's like hashtags and stuff.
That's what I used to do.
it's optimizing keywords and headers.
It's really hectic because like I used to do that for
It's hard
like,
too.
yeah, because like you basically like have like a campaign and you have to do like a keyword and basically you kind of like push in keywords and the keywords have to be integrated into your content. So like
Yeah.
if you're writing like an article for a blog post, you can use like a keyword for a text, something like that. And yeah, you basically have to like make sure like whatever keyword that you want people to type in to find it. So if you like put like
There's a lot of
yeah, it's super complicated.
there's a lot of
So it's not like copy paste.
no.
Because
Not if you want to
too
do it
much,
well.
yeah, if you do too much of it, like if you put in like too many keywords, Google will know if you're pushing too hard, and it'll actually discourage you and actually push you up. Yeah,
There's you can pay people a lot of money to do it well. It's so outside of my forte. I can't really tell you exactly how it works well, but there's the whole science to it. It's stupid.
Was there anything I can do? And this is a bad question, but all my objects are just coming back.
Looking at
yeah, was that?
Yeah.
look for like Chrome extensions with JSON formatter or something.
Okay.
There's one called JSON formatter even.
Oh yeah, they'll give you like a
Um,
score. That's
And if you add it to Chrome,
totally
it'll
hard
be
to
really
really do that stuff.
I would do like JSON
If you
formatter
do it on
Chrome
your own, if it's
extension or something.
they a company for
There you
it.
go.
So if somebody will submit it and subject run it by Google, then you can be, you know, like to get on the first page, it's like super hard.
That's YouTube search.
That's like for like
Yeah.
decades.
No,
Already, or
And then yeah, you can just usually just click the button and it will format it for you, so it's not so painful ugly.
So it just does it automatically.
Oh, there you go. Shows it automatically into the extension. All right, how's everyone doing on this one?
You get 4.
4? You're gonna give it a 4?
I mean, I did it.
Where did Justin go?
5 is like
I know Charlie. Justin,
Fast
leave.
words.
Oh, you left too.
Did it.
4 or 5-ish on that one. Nice, nice. Cool. All right. So I was surprised at how little actually had to be done. Yeah, this one query was not the easiest query, but it was one query you had to write. Which is interesting. Stephanie brought this up. Is now that we're in the content, I do not see how this would have taken a whole Saturday. Honestly, so we have one more activity. So
That's weird.
yeah, it is weird. Well, Trilogy has this habit of thinking that more activities mean it takes longer, and there's like depth of content. The reality is there's only so much I can talk about each of these concepts, because it's like one small concept after another. So even when I'm talking as long as I can, I'm still not even filling up the time that they've allotted.
Saturday's still a 3 hours class. You take an hour lunch.
It's a half an hour longer than today's class. And I
Saturday?
cut out about 20 minutes of content, but it wouldn't have taken 20 minutes.
I wish Saturday was like just like the same duration as, you know, like
Yeah,
morning class.
I think
Like,
we all
didn't
do.
really need to take that long.
Yeah. Anyway, we have this one query we want to write. So what we have now is we have our users, and the users now have notes. And what we want to do is when we query this populated user endpoint, we want to be able to get all the users and their notes. So the models are actually made for us, which is kind of nice. So if you just want to look at how they're going to be built, we have our little notes, a title and a body. Simple enough. We have our user, again, has an array with a reference to the notes. So ref to note, if we look at the notes again, that's the name of the model here. Right? Woo, right here. They're the same. This is an array because we have the brackets. The type is an object ID, so we know it's going to be related to a key in Mongo. Models are all made up. Good. So, again, also the other thing is the models are exported in this index.js, which means if we look up the top, woo, they're in this DB object. Right? So, we want to get our users with their notes. Who's got any ideas?
DB dot user
User, nice.
dot
Dot find.
parentheses that thing should be.
Do we need to find anything specific? No.
Can we pause with that?
We can.
What is specific, when you type dot user, what are you specifically referencing?
The user model. So let's look here. Let's follow this. This is a DB object that is returned from this models file, right? Which actually references this index.js, which is this. So the user is the user's model in here. Whoop. That's the chain. Make sense?
Yeah, it's a little confusing because like when Mongo adds the S's to it, like I'm thinking on the database side, like what the table is called. not
Yes. So
specifically
your model
the
name here,
side.
lowercase it, 2 lower, and make it plural. That's your rule. So this is users. I see. So that's more
Right,
what
'cause
you're
I'm
asking?
thinking I'm trying to query specifically Mongo from when I was typing this out, so I was like, why is it user and not users?
Yeah, because we named the model user. That's really it. So we find here, now what do we need to do? Dot populate. And what are we populating?
Notes.
The notes.
Would you capitalize that end in notes?
Nope.
No, because that's the table. Now
Nope, that's not the table. This is the property name on the user schema. And that is notes. If this was notes 2, you would change this to notes 2, but the table name's still going to be notes.
Yeah, so I capitalize it because in the notes.
They
it
don't-
says notes.
They don't help themselves in these examples because they give too many things the same damn name.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why I'm just like, all
And it says populate with notes with a capital N. Like when they're writing it out.
Does it?
Yeah, like
You might be able to do either one, honestly. Like I said, you can also just leave it empty. It'll populate everything.
I was not using that, but I saw it.
All right, so we've populated. Now we know we have the then, right? And we're just gonna do a res.json on our DB user, and then
So you need to
yeah, we can add the catch just to be good little developers. Even though we're not gonna really run into it here. Res.json and we have our query.
Yeah.
Any questions on this?
Does every user get populated with every note?
No, every user gets populated with the notes on their collection. So in each user record, there will be an array of object IDs, right? And those will be object IDs that are specifically added to the user. So remember when we had the libraries? And if I go back here, this is kind of what it's going to look like. See how we have this library and it has books and it's just this object ID in Mongo? It will have a user and it'll have notes and it'll have just an object ID, and those are just the notes that were added to that user. So you can have a bunch of notes. For instance, if I go back and look at all these look at the libraries again, there's 2 object IDs here. Okay? If I do db books insert author test and title, no thanks, I add that. If I do db books find pretty, you can see I have these 3 object IDs. Now look at the end of this one, it ends in 3.2, right? So if I go and get my libraries, the object ID with 3.2 is not in here, because I did not specifically add that object ID to this library. So there's a book out there that exists, not part of a library, and if I do that populate, it's not going to pick this one up because it does not belong in this array. Does that make more sense? So the array basically directly has the keys that it's looking for.
So how would you add that book to the library? Would you have to insert through the library?
You could do update. And then this is where you do .push
Oh, right.
books. And then you could do so now if I go, all three of them are in there. Make more sense?
Yeah.
This is kind of like the foreign key thing in. It's not at all like the foreign key thing. I'm lying to you. It's totally different. And that's what makes this a little bit more confusing because it's not actually any real relationship. We're just kind of like, yeah, I guess that this belongs here, but we're doing that ourselves. And Mongoose is helping us fabricate these results based off of that data. It's not real Mongo queries it's writing. It's actually probably writing two queries. One to get all of the information from Mongo for the libraries, and then another to get all the specific books.
So shuffling around the data.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah, so I was just trying to kind of figure out why in this one with the notes and user or whatever, that the note was only being added to that one user.
Because there's no other user.
Yeah, but then I added another user to see if the notes would get added to both, and it didn't.
Got added to the first one, didn't it?
Yeah.
And the reason why I got added to the first one is because this query, find one and update, it finds the first one.
No.
Because this query part doesn't tell you what user to find. So if the user had a username, you could actually change this, submit, potentially, to have like a username. So say you put username right here. And then you could do something like find one and update, where username equals rec.params.username. Oops. Username, right? And that way you can limit it to that particular user. But if you don't do that, then it's just going to find the first one. In this case, it always finds the first one you added, because that's going to come first.
So then if you just change that, like, return db.user, if you made that db.user.find, and then you just find, like, user Peyton or something, then it would just add that note to me.
Well, if you just change this to a find, it won't add anything. It'll just find that. But if you have find one and update, and then you did, yeah, username, and you did Peyton, right? Then yes, it would update that user. So if you go do that in your code and change this to be the username to always be the second user, yeah, it'd update the second user.
Okay, that makes sense.
Any other questions? Cool. TAs will slack this out, and we'll get ready for our last activity. Bum-ba-da-bum. So, we remember when we used all that scraping stuff with Cheerio to scrape into Mongo with Mongo.js. Now we're going to do it with Mongoose. So, it's going to have the same concept where you have to visit /scrape to get it to work. So let me get it running on my machine to show you, just in case you forgot how it worked, which is very possible. Installing node server. Boom, listening on port 3000. We go to the scrape endpoint. Scrape complete. We go back here. I think it's all. Never mind. There we go. Sorry, it just was caching. And here you go. Here's our information. Ooh, you can even add notes. Wow. And then if I click on it again, ooh, there are my notes. So there's going to be some populate logic coming in here, notes related to the individual links. This is a good link. It makes me really happy.
If you save the note and refresh, it will show the note.
No, you click on it.
Sure does.
Or as long as you
Well,
can
no,
do
I
it.
meant like if they were smart enough to show you your notes on the page.
Oh no, no, I'm just click it. So you're going to be building this. Obviously, you don't got to build the front end. You just have to build the queries and build the schemas and all that jazz. But this is your challenge. It's the last activity for today. When everyone's feeling done, let me know. We're supposed to schedule at least 30 minutes for it. But if you guys in 20 minutes are like, yeah, we're done enough, then tell me. It's kind of up to you guys. I want you guys to get enough time to work on this and feel comfortable with it. 10? Is 10 enough? No.
Just 10.
This is 20.
20. Oh, I forgot to scroll down. My bad.
Northern Moon on it.
I've been doing the wrong one, getting it right.
Well, nothing to say.
I'm ashamed. I changed this information.
Put this on. Nothing changed. Nothing.
It gives you the schema, so it looks like we pretty much are just going to be writing all the queries for this bad boy. So, use the past examples, because they all have similar enough queries. Really, this is the last activity. They don't even make you define the schema. We go through all this hassle of building schemas, and you almost never do anything with them. You don't want to run a classroom to get my steps for the day.
Yeah, done.
If you want to advance, go up and down the stairs.
Well, I don't want to stay in the classroom. I don't want to walk up the stairs.
Yeah.
If you want less advanced, go up and down the elevator.
I don't know if that helps my steps now.
Nope. But,
What? What? Just like gravity.
no. It's that feeling of like that
Yeah,
feeling when you
but
get to the top. That
Go ahead and work together on this one too.
Kills your powers, or increases life.
I give you the article. Give you the article. Getting all the articles in the group. Find all. And then function. And then you do article. The 18 so we'll do this. Return the data. Getting all of it. Oh yeah.
Wait, it's kind of humble.
I have no idea. Like, I was working like within an hour and I didn't feel. I didn't even see it. I think there's like 3 hours plus minimum. How many steps do you need now?
Probably like 9 balls.
Probably not gonna hit my step goal tonight, Mom.
Do what my girlfriend does. She'll like, we'll be watching TV. She'll just stand before the bed and just walk her face. It actually counts. Like, your
Yeah.
stepper.
Your stepper counts it, but the physics counted, I don't know.
Or
Your body
she's
counts.
actually like taking steps. She's not going anywhere.
It's looking crazy.
My wife does it sometimes. If we're like really close, if we go out for a walk, we get like 85 minutes, she'll walk around the couch for like 20 minutes.
Oh,
And our
man.
dogs will just follow
Does it
her, so they
look
all
crazy?
I've watched my girlfriend step in place for like 8,000 steps just to reach the 10,000.
That's insanity. Keep your dedication.
We were watching. We were binging on Netflix, so it didn't really matter. We're going anywhere for a while.
What is param short for?
parameters.
I googled that shit. I googled params and it's like docs out Microsoft.
New Jersey.
Gotta be more explicit than that.
You know, shitty.
It could be like, what does rec param stand for in Express.js? Probably would have gotten an answer.
Those are too many new words. I don't know.
Let's see.
Hey,
They have one, it's called a dictionary. Sorry.
what's the new true in the computer one? What is it?
You should make one for us.
Like when you're
Parameters.
when you're finding one and updating.
Was right now request.
Saying, when we're adding a new element, not taking it. Okay. So the rec frames ID's working. But the ID needs to match. What is that ID that's coming in?
So that's where you can't find the I guess the format. Is that what you're getting at with the format? Or
Yeah. So is that what the endpoint was that they were using for?
yeah.
If you console log rec parameter ID, what exactly is it? Because if it's an object ID, I would do it before you can call it. Let me look really quick to make sure they're not passing it as a string. Because it could just be, like, how do you do a query? Say you wanted to query on the username. How would you write that query?
right? What would that object look like in the find? Now, with the username, replace that with ID. What does that look like in the find? Try that. See if that helps you. Let me verify.
No, it's just yeah, I got undefined when I click on it to open the note, it show the title. Yeah, I haven't seen it through. I had to change the freaking paper. Oh, it did. Oh, I did, right?
There's a slight trick though, and that is that the property ID is not ID in the database. It's always underscore ID. So you need to search for underscore ID, and then it should work.
It's in the document, it's like document.onput.p or whatever. I don't know if it's in the head, just goes .mp. Yeah, and then if you go down to the dot then, you'll see, in the dot then it has, you know, get notes dot append.
So
and it's just appending
Rec Brand's
data
ID was
item. But
in
data
your find one query, how would you write it if it was using
data is
equals
an
ID?
object inside anyway.
Remember that object structure?
Data zero dot
When you pass in like properties.
I use a lot of examples, so I don't remember it like verbatim.
Yeah, it's similar to that. You don't need to put a string or anything. But instead of notes, what if you put
The only thing
underscore
that
ID?
didn't get done
equals
is
rec
saving
brand ID.
notes. I'm trying to do right now.
So if you do underscore ID and then the colon, rec params, and there's no underscore in the params ID, it's just ID.
I didn't write anything in that part there after.
Yep, try that. Start. You're gonna get undefined if you do the underscore rec param console on rec param underscore ID though, that'll be undefined. Does everyone want more time? Keep working?
Not really, can we just walk through it as a group?
Sure, we can walk through it as a group. Is everyone cool with that?
Yes.
That's the last one.
Okay. Okay, so we had to fill in these 3 queries, right? So the first one, we need to get all the articles from the database. So this is probably the easy query, right? This is the low-hanging fruit. So we'll do this one first. So this one, we're all familiar now that we're gonna have the DB object, right? And we're gonna be using that to get our models. So here we have db.article, and we need to just get all of them. So we can run a simple find, right? We can get a simple then with all of our articles, and we can do res.json on our articles. And then, just to be good developers, we'll do our catch. Should always do a catch. Fancy arrow function? Oh, the arrow function? You could do that here. Yes, you could, without problem, change it to that, which is what you'd see in most modern JavaScript these days anyway. If you're writing code alongside me, I'd probably write it like this. That one good? Everyone understand this one? Okay. Everyone's like, yeah, we got that. Move on. Alright. So now this one we have to get a single article by ID and populate it with its note. So in this one, it's going to be slightly different. Oops, sorry. Again, we need to get our article. And we can use the find one query to find one specifically. And we're getting the ID passed to us in the params. So we need to match this ID we're getting passed to the ID that's in the database for the article. So this would be rec.params.id. Does everyone see how I got there?
So you could do dot find.
You can do dot find, but it's going to return an array of items.
Oh, that's fine.
That's probably why
That's
we're
why
going
everyone
up.
messed up.
Yeah.
Yep. Find 1 returns a single 1. So if you do dot find, you need to take the 0 element out. 0 index, right?
So find one in there.
We also need to populate the notes. Then we can do,
Then function would be good.
I'll just call it A. I'm going to be a bad programmer, give it a bad name. And then we can do our dot catch.
It's note with no S.
It's note.
Yeah.
Good catch. You bet it is. It is note. Does everyone see how we got there? Make sense? Make more sense now that we've seen it?
Yeah, find one now.
Definitely find 1. Find's going to return an array. And matching up the ID, you need to match it to the underscore ID, because there's no ID property. Unless you specifically name it just ID, which you can do. You can turn off the Mongo functionality and change it, but I don't really recommend it, because it's confusing to people. Ready to move on to the last one? Alright, I'm going to add some space down here. Whoa, so we can see this one. Alright, this is going to save and update articles and their associated notes. So the first thing we need to do is create the note. And we can just do a simple rec.body pass in here because we don't have any special logic on like validation or anything like that. Cool. So here we need to do the article, find 1, and update. So this is going to have the ID equals rec.params.id. And this is going to be just a note. We don't need to push one here anymore. Why don't we need to push?
Because you're finding one.
Well, we're finding one
You're
article.
creating an
Why don't we need to push the notes? We had to push the books. We had to push the notes in the last example. Why don't we have to push the notes? Because we're not pushing to an array. There's only one note. There's only one note on the model. And let's take a look really quick. Verify that. Look. Right here, this is just note. And it's an object. There's not an array. So it's not notes anymore. There's not multiples. It's just directly 1. So, yep. So that way we know, whoops, that we don't need to push to an array. So that push syntax is gone. The last thing we need to do is this new true. Why do we need to do this? To tell it that we're completely updating the object with a new note. We're not like replacing a note or updating the note itself. Oh, never mind. I'm completely lying to you. New true tells this to return the updated user and not the existing user. Wow. I'm sorry. So this is going to find one and update it. If you don't pass in new true, it's going to return the article it found. If you pass in new true, it's going to return the article it updated after it's been updated. Okay? So new false returns the article. Returns true returns the article after it's updated. So everyone has asked me what this meant so far in class. I've completely lied to you and led you astray. It was a test to make sure you were paying attention to the docs and not your teacher. Alright. Now we have our article. We can do a simple res.json on the article. Then, again, as good developers, better than me since I don't read the docs, we'll go ahead and res.json in our catch. Send out an error. Now, right here, the reason why I kind of split this into multiple lines is it's much more compact, and this line would be really, really long if you put these all on one line. Yeah, so it's still pretty easy to read like this if you format it nice.
Because on the other one it was
All one line. It's kind of harder to see the different objects and where they fall in line as parameters. This is kind of a nicer structure, I think. Any questions on this last one? Anyone have any questions on anything we've covered today? Well, this is the last day of Mongo. So we're going to be using Mongo in Project 3, and we'll use it a little bit, I think, with like the React stuff. Oh, hey, now we have a full server that talks to Mongo and all that near the end. Probably not this next week, starting Saturday. So that's cool. Hopefully you guys liked Mongo. I think everyone liked it better than MySQL. I don't got anything else. If you don't got questions, you're free to go. Good job so far. This is a tough week, and today we had a lot to cover, so I think everyone did a great job. And one more week in the books, folks. We've got 5 more weeks, 6 more weeks, something like that. We're close. It's almost over. You guys are almost there.
So for our project we should use Mongo instead of
Yeah, you can use either one. It's up to you.